In this Corecon training video, we're going to explore ways to add miscellaneous expense transactions. Miscellaneous expenses can be entered through Corecon Mobile, which will be handled in a separate training video. In this video, we're using the Corecon browser product. Entering miscellaneous expenses can be done under projects or under human resources. I'm going to be using the human resource method. Under the time card and expense stats, we'll scroll down and see miscellaneous expenses. Go over to actions and let's add a miscellaneous expense manually. We'll select the project, prime contract, the company, the employee, and we're going to enter a miscellaneous expense against the employee's credit card. That's how this was paid. The miscellaneous expense payment types are explored in a separate training video under miscellaneous expense settings. Since it's the employee's credit card that's being used, we're going to reimburse, or the payee would be the employee. We'll enter a transaction date, the optional miscellaneous expense payment types, a cost code is required. It needs to be set up in the project under contract administration. I'm using the unit price for the fuel with tax already included, so I'm going to skip the tax option. And we're going to say that is a resource for equipment. And because this prime contract is a cost plus contract, this billable versus non-billable option is important. If this were a fixed lump sum prime contract, Corecon will assume that the line is automatically billable. It would be ideal to enter a copy of the receipt or other related information. This is also an option under Corecon Mobile. But remember, this is how you enter a miscellaneous expense for employee reimbursement. Notice that several options are here, so the employee can communicate how they paid the expense out of their own pocket. And we'll click Add and Close. The add transaction process is slightly different if you're using a corporate credit card or corporate debit card. Since the payee would be the credit card or the credit card company or the bank, we've also set it up so that we could do that as well. So we'll go to Actions. We're going to add a miscellaneous expense. We're going to use the same project, prime contract, the company, the employee, and Gordon has his own American Express card, which was issued by your corporation. So the payee would switch from employee to vendor, and we'll use A&A Building Supply as the payee. We'll enter the transaction date, the optional expense type, and a cost code is required. If the unit price includes the sales tax, you can skip the tax option. If you have taxes set up in Corecon's global settings, those can also be selected. And we'll call these materials under the cost resource. Ideally, we would also attach a copy of the receipt. We can do that from Choose File, or if this were being entered through Corecon Mobile, it can be taken right from the smart device. But in this case, we want to reiterate that the payment was made with a corporate credit card. Even though the employee is referenced as making that purchase, the payee now is a vendor. Remember that the vendor should be added to the project directory from your contact management list. And now we'll click Add and Close. Next, we want to use another method. We can do that back at the HR, or we could have continued in the same screen, but under miscellaneous expenses, we're going to import miscellaneous expenses from Excel. This is an ideal way to import a long list of miscellaneous expenses to multiple projects and contracts. You can also import employee reimbursements, corporate credit card charges, and corporate debit card charges all at the same time. To find the template, go to the knowledge base, to Getting Started, to Corecon Import Options from Excel, down to Time and Miscellaneous Expenses, and go to the miscellaneous expense option. There will be some notes and reminders as well as the instructions how to import this template once it's prepared. They're at the bottom, the fields that are available for import, and these fields correspond to the column headings in the sample provided. I've already set up a template using the sample that Corecon provided in that help article. I want to point out a few things. First of all, I can import from multiple projects at one time. This project number must be set up and should not be archived. I'm also importing to multiple prime contracts. These prime contracts must be set up, have an approved status and a status date. If a charge is specific to a particular change order, that can be added. If this cell is left blank, Corecon assumes it's part of the original contract budgets. Miscellaneous expense types are just categories or groupings that are assigned to miscellaneous expenses and are optional. The payment types must match those set up in the Corecon Global settings under Features and Time and Expenses. These also affect how the transactions are imported into your accounting system if you've integrated accounting software with Corecon. Notice that the employee name is required, must match the employee display name in the employee profile. Also notice that some of these are employee reimbursements. Others are payments to companies directly. That corresponds to whether they're corporate credit cards or debit cards. If you use a payee company as the payee type, the vendor is also required, and that vendor must already be set up in the project directory, and the name must match. The billable status can be billable, non-billable, or hold. If this cell is left blank, Corecon assumes that it's billable. The cost codes must already exist in the project, and an item resource or cost resource is required for each line. Also notice that I'm importing employee reimbursements and company payments at the same time. I'm going to click File Save and File Close. Next, we're in Human Resources. We'll go back down to Miscellaneous Expenses and Actions, and we're going to import from Excel. I'm going to choose File, and we'll select the spreadsheet we just set up and click Open. We can see 3 of the transactions did not import. So we'll scroll to the far right and we'll see the reason. There's a cost code missing out of the contract admin cost codes. So to fix that, instead of re-importing the whole thing, we can just click Export to Excel. When we export this exception report, it's already set up in an import template. We do have to delete this message, but everything was brought over, including the date. Then we'll go back to that project, go to Client Contract Admin, and then to Job Cost Codes. The cost code referenced was slightly different than the cost code that's set up in the project. So we'll go back to HR, back to Miscellaneous Expenses. Before we do, we'll fix that cost code. We'll save it. Then back to Miscellaneous Expenses, Actions, Import from Excel. Click Choose File. Here's the exception report that we fixed, and click Open. And we can see the remaining 3 transactions have successfully imported. Back to HR. There's one more subject we should cover, and that is approving miscellaneous expenses. If you go to Miscellaneous Expenses and Actions and select Approve Miscellaneous Expenses, you may want to run some log style reports to review. But once you're ready, there's several things that you could do. If you select all transactions, for example, you could copy these with a new date if they're repetitive transactions. You can lock miscellaneous expenses. You can approve or approve and lock miscellaneous expenses. We're going to approve and lock and click Apply global changes. All the items were approved. When we go back to miscellaneous expenses, if you wanted to see those, you can go back to Actions, Approve Miscellaneous Expenses, and change the filter from Pending to Approved. Click Apply, and you can see all of the transactions with an approved status date. If you'd like to know more about this subject, we encourage you to go to the knowledge base under the Corecon browser solution, under Human Resources, down to Employee Miscellaneous Expenses. You'll find the information covered in this training video as well as additional information you might find helpful.